Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Mike Norvell, Florida State, working their way through fall camp. And we are at that point for Florida State during fall camp where you're starting to get a real good feel of the Florida State players that are starting to break out and kind of getting a feel for what players are going to be difference makers for this Florida State program in 2024. Want to get into some of those names that are catching my eyes in the press conferences and the fall camp practice notes. Really excited to get into this one now. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to the Florida State fans. I mean, whenever we talk this program, the amount of support y'all show in the comment section, I can't thank you guys enough. This is a program I love talking about, and the support you guys throw in the comment section, that stuff means the world. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And much more importantly, I know every Florida State fan listening to this no doubt has read the fall camp notes, have listened to the press conferences. Would love to hear from you guys in terms of what players are catching your eyes during the press conferences in the fall camp practice notes. We'll chop it up in the comments section. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I think it's so fascinating. I mean, the notebook I have is filled with names that I want to brush by. And I think what's so exciting about this Florida State fall camp is, yeah, you lost a lot of talent to the NFL draft, but a lot of Florida State fans who've been following this program over the last couple of years and during the offseason, I mean, we know that this team has a ton of talent that is waiting to break out. And during fall camp, this is when you get the feeling and kind of get the understanding of what players are going to be those breakout players come 2024. Now, let's start with the quarterback position. The reports on DJU early in fall camp have been solid. And I think for Florida State early in fall camp with a new transfer quarterback, to hear that DJU has been solid probably sits pretty well with you. Because at first, right, if DJU is solid in 2024, this Florida State team's winning a lot of football games. But what happens if DJU, after the next couple of weeks, continues to get more comfortable in this offense, more comfortable with the new pass catchers within this Florida State offense? What happens if DJU goes from solid to pretty dang good? That's when this Florida State offense, at least in my opinion, gets fun. So we're liking what we're hearing from DJU. The quarterback I want to mention, and again, I don't know if it necessarily pertains to the 2024 season, but you talk about what Mike Norvell is building in Tallahassee. True freshman Luke Kromenhoek pops up every single time that I read the fall camp practice notes, even going back to the spring practice notes. This kid is going to be special for Florida State, at least in my opinion. I loved him out of high school, started his career as a wide receiver, and then goes to that quarterback position as a junior and senior and just continues to get better as a quarterback. And you're seeing that growth continue as he gets into this Florida State offense. And, I wouldn't be surprised, and this is not a shot at Brock Glenn. I'm a big fan of Brock Glenn. Wouldn't be surprised if at some point during this season, your quarterback too is true freshman Luke Kromenhoek, because I think he's going to be special. And I think he's one of the more talented quarterbacks we've seen within this Florida State program in quite a long time. Fire me up for Luke Kromenhoek. And again, I don't know if it's going to matter. Ideally, it doesn't matter in 2024, but you start looking at 2025 and in 2026 as Florida State continues to stack these recruiting classes and get this roster right. Luke Kromenhoek's going to be a quarterback that you can win a lot of football games within the ACC or another conference in the future. Now, the next position group I want to go to the running back position, but I don't even know if we're going to call these two guys a running back. Lawrence Tuafili and Jalen Lucas. Now, we know what Lawrence Tuafili can do. He has been very solid for Florida State throughout his career in Tallahassee. Jalen Lucas, very similar kind of player in terms of he's not going to be a guy that gets 20-plus carries a game, but he's going to get a lot of touches in a lot of different situations, and you can manufacture a lot of explosive plays with these two running backs out of the backfield. And a big conversation that we've had within this Florida State program is how do you replace all the receiving production from guys like Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson? Well, one way you can do it is getting the football to guys like Lawrence Tuafili and Jalen Lucas. You read the spring scrimmage notes. Jalen Lucas is going to be a difference maker within this Florida State offense, and it's going to look different, whether he's in the backfield, whether he's a slot wide receiver. Jalen Lucas is one of those guys that you want to get incorporated in the offense, get the football into his hands, and let good things happen. And when Jalen Lucas committed to Florida State, my first thought was, what a great fit within this Mike Norvell offense. I mean, Mike Norvell, if there's any coach that's going to know how to use someone like Jalen Lucas, it's Mike Norvell. And as fall camp continues to go on, it sounds like Jalen Lucas is starting to find his spot within the Florida State offense. And again, I think he's a guy that can manufacture some of those explosive plays that you kind of lose without Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. It's going to look different than Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson catching the football 20-plus yards down the field, but you can still manufacture explosive plays with guys like Jalen Lucas and Lawrence Tuafili. Going to the wide receiver room, it sounds like Malik Benson's still going to be the wide receiver one, but I want to highlight two other wide receivers that seem to be making a move during fall camp. Let's go to true freshman Elijah Moore. This is such a unique wide receiver that can make some of the more incredible catches that you'll see. You go back to the high school film, this kid is just incredible at the catch point. He's got a big physical frame, but more importantly than just being big and physical, his ability to attack the football in the air and have that body control and coordination is kind of next level. He's one of those wide receivers where he doesn't need to be open to get the ball thrown his way, and he doesn't need to be open to come down and make those catches. He is elite at those 50-50 balls. They turn more into 80-20. Florida State's looking for those bigger wide receivers to work on the boundary again to replace guys like Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. I wouldn't be surprised if true freshman Elijah Moore is one of those guys to replace some of that production. And then you talk about another wide receiver that's a newcomer. He's going to be a redshirt freshman, Jaylen Brown, coming from LSU, one of the fastest players on this football team, one of the faster players in all of college football, runs a 10.66 in the 100-meter dash. Sounds like he's making some moves too. Florida State's going to be able to attack down the field with two different kind of wide receivers. And we all know DJU has the arm talent, the arm strength to push the ball down the field. You have big-bodied wide receivers, guys like Akeem Williams, guys like Elijah Moore, and then you have the speedsters, guys like Jaylen Brown. And Malik Benson, who's just big and fast. That's why we think he's going to be the wide receiver one. You have a lot of different kind of wide receivers. You got a lot of size, and you got a lot of speed. And normally that's a pretty good combination when you're trying to fill out a Florida State wide receiver room. The conversation continues to be, hey, we know we have a lot of talent in this room. Now you're just looking for the wide receivers to kind of step up and kind of become the guys within that Florida State room. We're getting a better feeling for who those guys are going to be. The last position I want to talk about is the offensive line, where I want to highlight Jacob Rizzi from Cornell, Harvard, Ivy League. I keep messing up where he's from. We broke down Jacob Rizzi when he committed to Florida State, and I think one of the most important conversations to have with Jacob Rizzi is he's going to be that flex interior offensive lineman where you go back to last year in 2023, Florida State got banged up on the offensive line, and they just had to continue to shuffle what this offensive line was going to be. You go into 2024, you feel so much better about the depth on this Florida State offensive line, where if you do have to rotate guys on the offensive line, it's not going to be as disruptive as it was last year. When you look at Jacob Rizzi, if he can emerge as that true backup center and Maurice Smith has to miss a game, you don't have to kick Darius Washington, your all-conference left tackle, into the center spot like Florida State had to do last year. So I think the depth on the offensive line emerging for Florida State, I think, is a massive storyline. And I think this Florida State offensive line, if they do stay healthy, is probably going to be the best Florida State offensive line we've seen since Mike Norvell has taken over. There are a lot of reasons to have question marks or say Florida State's going to take a step back from 2023. That one reason that I'm saying Florida State might not take the step back that everybody expects is because they might have a much improved offensive line from what they had in 2023. Going to the defensive side of the football, I want to highlight a guy that we've talked extensively about over the last couple of weeks. Daniel Lyons continues to stack good days, and that's what we're looking for from Daniel Lyons. You look at this kid on the inside of the defensive line, we've seen the flashes going back to that 2023 season as a redshirt freshman. The consistency wasn't always there. And to continue to see Daniel Lyons' name get mentioned in the fall camp reports, that's massive, because what does that mean? He's starting to be a little bit more consistent as a football player. You look at Darrell Jackson Jr., Joshua Farmer, we ain't got no questions about those two kind of starting on the inside of the defensive line. Our biggest question mark was, what does the depth on the inside of the defensive line look like after those two? You feel solid about Grady Kelly, but Daniel Lyons continuing to show that he can be a consistent football player for Florida State. I think that's a massive storyline. Again, it's not always flashy to talk about depth down the lines of scrimmage, but it is very important, especially for this Florida State program. Going back to the linebacker room, we talked about Cam Riley last week kind of being that guy. Blake Nicholson, Justin Cryer, two guys that I'll put my hand up and just say I kind of counted out. I didn't think it was a very good performance by those two in the bowl game against Georgia. I probably put too much stock into that game. And now it also sounds like they're just getting better as football players as well. And that means a lot in terms of depth in the linebacker room, where I think you do have your starting linebackers in DJ Lundy and Cam Riley. We had the question mark of what was going to be linebacker 3 and 4. To hear Justin Cryer, Blake Nicholson slowly starting to put it together, I think that's massive. Two guys that, I think have the physical traits. I think when you go back to that Georgia Bowl game, it was a little bit more of the instincts and kind of what was between the ears, not filling the right lanes, kind of getting lost in traffic. That's only going to get better as they mature as football players. And so I kind of expect Justin Cryer and Blake Nicholson to take those steps heading into 2024. And if they do, and we start to get these linebacker questions just a little bit more mitigated, I think that's a really big storyline. Going to the secondary, two players I want to shout out. One is Shaheem Brown. So I was to be one of the leaders of this Florida State team, specifically in the back end. A guy that played really good football for Florida State last year, kind of just got lost in the conversation because how many good players were in that Florida State secondary. It sounds like he might be one of the leaders coming from that safety spot. And then Earl Little Jr. I think this is a player that has massive, massive potential. But number two, why I kind of knew Earl Little Jr. was going to be a guy was when Greedy Vance Jr. transferred out. Because I thought Greedy Vance Jr. was a really, really dang good football player for Florida State in 2023. And he just transferred after spring because I think Earl Little Jr. just kind of took that starting nickel spot away. If Earl Little Jr. was good enough to just have Greedy Vance pack up and leave Tallahassee, go to USC, a football player that I think is a really good player, and it tells you a little bit about what Earl Little Jr. has done in spring practice, what he's doing in fall camp, and what he can be for Florida State in the 2024 season. A lot of good stuff coming out of Florida State. I appreciate Mike Norvell because he gives a lot of media access to fall camp. He shares a lot with the media, gives us a lot to talk about. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.